It began like any other day. A quick visit to family, groceries on the passenger seat, the familiar comfort of a childhood home. But for Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a routine stop in South Dallas quickly devolved into a jarring confrontation. A stark reminder that even a badge of office offers no shield against ingrained prejudice. This is the story of how a seemingly small incident of injustice ignited a national conversation and set in motion a powerful fight for accountability. Two officers handcuffed a woman outside her own family home. What they didn't realize was she was a U.S. Congresswoman who wasn't about to let it slide. Jasmine Crockett hadn't planned to stay long. It was just a quick visit, checking on Aunt Shirley, drop off groceries, maybe sit on the porch for a few minutes. The house hadn't changed much since she was a teenager. Same white siding, same squeaky gate, same patch of overgrown rose bushes curling under the windowsill. The neighborhood, tucked between a community center and an old tire shop on Bonnie View Road in South Dallas, still had that rhythm. She remembered kids riding bikes in the street, someone blasting Al Green from a cracked screen door, a man walking his pit bull and waving at every car that passed. She felt grounded here. Aunt Shirley had just pulled a peach cobbler out of the oven and was fussing about Jasmine staying for dinner. But Jasmine had a fundraiser to attend later that night near Highland Park. I can't go smelling like cobbler and Vicks, she teased. They hugged tight, Shirley rubbing Jasmine's back like she used to when she came home, crying from school. It was only a few steps to the car. Jasmine, wearing jeans and a plain blue t-shirt, carried a reusable tote with leftover cornbread and a mason jar of sweet tea. Her press-on nails tapped lightly on her keys. That's when she noticed the cruiser. It wasn't speeding, just slow rolling. Two officers inside. One in the driver's seat, a younger guy with buzzed hair and mirrored sunglasses. The other, older, staring hard. Jasmine noticed it. She always noticed. Being a black woman in Texas politics had sharpened her instincts. She kept walking, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The car came to a full stop, blocking part of her driveway. Jasmine's brow furrowed as she turned toward them. "Ma'am," the older officer called out. "Can we talk to you for a second?" "Sure," Jasmine said calmly, still standing on her own property. "Is something wrong? We got a call about suspicious activity in the area." "You match the description." Jasmine blinked. "Suspicious activity?" she repeated. "Officer, I'm Representative Jasmine Crockett. I grew up on this street." The younger cop opened the door and stepped out. "ID, please. I live in D.C. I don't have it on me right now, but I'm a sitting member of Congress. My face is public record." They didn't even blink. The older one stepped out too, hand on his belt, eyes now scanning the tote bag like it might explode. "You mind if we search that?" "Actually, I do mind," she said. "You have no cause, and I just explained who I am." That's when a shift happened. Their tone changed. "No recognition, no hesitation." "Ma'am, put the bag down. We're going to need you to place your hands where we can see them." "You're not serious," Jasmine said. The older cop's voice hardened. "Now." Jasmine raised her hands. Her heart pounded, but her face remained steady. Two neighbors had stepped out onto their porches. A teen across the street started recording on his phone. She spoke clearly, like she was reading into a microphone. "I am Representative Jasmine Crockett. I am being unlawfully detained in front of my family's home." But it didn't matter. The younger officer grabbed her wrist and twisted her around. Cold metal clamped onto one wrist, then the other. The tote bag hit the ground. Cornbread scattered onto the driveway. The jar shattered. They didn't ask another question. No Miranda rights, no explanation. Just two men convinced they were right. And a woman who refused to be small in the face of it. But across the street, a boy named Kian kept recording. And that would change everything. The cuffs weren't tied at first, but they didn't have to be. The message had already been sent. Jasmine stood on her own driveway, hands pinned behind her back, surrounded by two officers who looked like they'd already made up their minds. Her shoulders stiffened as she glanced toward Aunt Shirley's window. The curtain shifted slightly. She was watching. A neighbor called out, "Hey." She didn't do nothing, but no one moved closer. Not yet. Jasmine turned her head slightly and spoke as clearly as she could. "You are detaining a United States Congresswoman without cause. I told you who I am. This is not legal. The older officer, name tag reading Reed, didn't even flinch. We got a description of someone loitering and possibly casing homes. Female, blue shirt, black pants. You're here. That's what we're working with. That could describe half the women in this neighborhood. Jasmine snapped. The younger cop, his name was Dunlap, was less confident. His hands trembled a little as he picked up her drop-tote bag and peeked inside. Just food, he muttered. Reed shot him a look. Still need a check. No, you don't, Jasmine said, turning her head as far as she could. You've already violated my rights. Ma'am, don't resist, Reed warned, like it was a reflex. I'm not resisting. I'm standing on my mother's driveway. Another voice shouted from the street. Y'all know who that is? That's Jasmine Crockett. Phones were out now. At least 4 people filming. Kian from across the street had moved closer. He didn't say anything, just kept recording with one hand while the other gripped his bike handle like it was an anchor. Tell him, Miss Crockett, someone yelled. We got you. Reed looked up, suddenly realizing they were losing control of the moment. Let's move her to the car. Dunlap hesitated. You sure? You got a problem following orders? Reed barked. Dunlap didn't answer. He moved toward Jasmine, gently guiding her toward the cruiser, but his body language had changed. He knew something was off. Jasmine, still handcuffed, took a breath. You can still do the right thing, she told him quietly. I'm not going to sue you. Not if you stop this right now. Dunlap didn't respond, but his grip loosened. Before she could be placed in the back seat, a third car arrived. A supervising officer, Latino, maybe mid-40s, clean uniform, calm walk. He took in the scene. The cuffs, the neighbors, the phones, and Jasmine's unmistakable face. He moved quickly. Who is this? He asked. Reed responded. Possible suspect matches a loitering call. The supervisor frowned. That's Congresswoman Crockett. Reed blinked. How was I supposed to know? Did she tell you who she was? She claimed. The supervisor raised a hand, cutting him off. Uncuff her. Reed didn't move. Dunlap did. The second the metal clicked off, Jasmine rolled her wrists slowly, trying to hide the sting. Her pride hurt more than her bones. I'd like to speak to your department lawyer, she said, locking eyes with the supervisor. Right now, the supervisor nodded. Yes, ma'am, and I sincerely apologize. She turned toward the growing crowd. Did everyone get that on video? Multiple voices responded. Yes, ma'am. She turned back to Reed. You'll be seeing this again. He didn't answer. Dunlap stepped back, eyes down. Jasmine bent down slowly, picking up what was left of her mason jar. The sweet tea had soaked into the driveway. Aunts are already finding it. She turned toward Aunt Shirley's house. Her aunt stood outside now, one hand on the porch rail, the other clenched tight at her side. You okay? She called out. Jasmine forced a small smile. Not yet, but I will be. But by the time Jasmine reached her car, the video had already started spreading fast. Kian didn't mean to start a firestorm. He just wanted to show what happened. He uploaded the video to his TikTok with the caption, "They just cuffed a congresswoman on her own block. South Dallas ain't safe for nobody." By the time Jasmine pulled out of the driveway, hands still red from the cuffs, the clip had already crossed 5,000 views. Within minutes, it hit Twitter, then Facebook. Someone tagged her official account. Another tagged the local news station. It was moving faster than she could track. She drove to a quiet parking lot near Keys Park and just sat there staring at the dashboard. Her chest was tight, not from fear, but from a weight she'd carried before, but never like this. Being followed in stores, pulled over while driving. Those things she'd filed under normal. But handcuffed on the lawn she used to run through as a kid, that was something else. Her phone lit up. Text after text. Colleagues, activists, a reporter from the Dallas Morning News. She didn't answer anyone right away. Instead, she called Aunt Shirley. I'm okay, she said quietly. They let me go. I watched the whole damn thing, her aunt replied, voice shaky. I never thought I'd see that happen to you. Not you. Jasmine didn't say anything. There was too much to say. By the time she returned home to her place near downtown, a clip from the incident had made it onto a local news segment. No names yet, just unidentified woman handcuffed in South Dallas. Incident involving police. She stood in her kitchen, staring at her own face on screen. Unidentified. The word echoed in her mind. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she watched the videos on loop from different angles. Her voice calm but rising. The faces of the officers, the neighbors yelling. The disbelief on Kian's face as she was walked to the car. At 2:14 a.m., she sat at her dining table and started writing. Not a tweet, not a press release, a statement. She wrote it from her gut. Today, I was treated like a stranger in the neighborhood that raised me. No badge, no title, no public service could shield me from what too many of us face. I was handcuffed in front of my family's home for fitting a vague description. This is not just about me. It's about the system that allows this to happen without a second thought. But I'm not afraid, and I am not backing down. She read it 3 times before posting. Then she hit send. The response was instant. Thousands of comments, retweets, screenshots. This is who y'all just put in cuffs. They knew exactly what they were doing. She's still not safe. Annie surely needs her own security detail. By sunrise, she was trending nationally. Someone from MSNBC reached out. Then Roland Martin. Then local activists from Fort Worth to Fresno. The hashtag started. Hashtag Justice for Jasmine Crockett was home, she told them who she was. But Jasmine didn't care about trends. She cared about momentum. At 7:45 a.m., her team called. We can cancel the fundraiser, her assistant said. The whole night shifted. Everyone wants to talk to you now. Jasmine thought for a beat, then shook her head. We don't cancel. We reframe. Tell the press I'll be holding a statement at 2 p.m. in front of City Hall. Don't spin it. Don't soften it. They need to hear it exactly the way it happened. A pause. You sure? I'm done asking for permission. She stood up from the table. The sun was rising through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor. Her hands still ached, but her mind was sharp. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was building something. But before she could address the public, she had one more stop to make, and it was personal. The sun was directly overhead when Jasmine stepped in front of the microphones. No podium, no prepared statement on paper, just her standing beneath the stone columns of Dallas City Hall, flanked by a few local officials and her legal advisor, Reynolds Triggs, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who once sued the city for misconduct and won. She looked out at the sea of cameras, boom mics, and blinking red lights. People had started gathering an hour before. Some held handmade signs. Others just stood silently, arms crossed, eyes focused. Jasmine took a breath. For those who don't know me, I'm Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. And yesterday, 2 police officers handcuffed me outside my aunt's home on the same street where I learned how to ride a bike, where I got my first whooping for tracking dirt through the house, where we used to barbecue on Sundays and stay out too late playing kickball under the streetlights. She paused. I told them who I was. They ignored it. They saw a black woman in a blue shirt and assumed she didn't belong. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. I wasn't dressed up. I didn't have on a name tag or a blazer. I wasn't holding a microphone or standing in front of Congress. I was just a woman with a bag of leftovers in her hand. And to them, that made me suspicious. Trigg stood quietly beside her, arms folded, watching the crowd. I've been pulled over, followed, second-guessed. But this was different because it didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter how calm I was. They didn't want to listen. They wanted to control. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, the live stream numbers climbed. And I'm not standing here today to make this about one neighborhood or one badge. I'm not asking for apologies. I am demanding accountability. We can't keep patching holes in a sinking ship. We need structural change. One reporter shouted, Congresswoman, do you plan to file a formal complaint? She didn't even blink. Already did, and that's just the start. Another voice asked, what do you say to those who think the officers were just doing their jobs? Jasmine looked straight into the lens of the nearest camera. If doing your job means detaining someone without cause, ignoring their identification, and escalating a situation based on nothing but appearance, then the job is broken, and we need to fix it. Applause broke out. Not polite claps, real ones, the kind that come from the gut. She raised her voice just enough to reach the back of the crowd. This isn't about me being a congresswoman. This is about every kid who's ever been stopped for walking home. Every parent who's had to give the talk to their child about how to survive a police encounter. Every innocent person who's been treated like a threat before they ever spoke a word. She paused again, letting the weight of her words settle. Yesterday, they tried to shrink me, but what they really did was spotlight the problem. I've spent my life fighting for justice, and now I've lived through another version of the same injustice I've been trying to stop. So, I'm taking this to the floor of Congress. I'm drafting legislation that mandates real, enforceable federal bias training, not optional PowerPoints. I'm pushing for body cam transparency, and I'm calling for penalties when officers ignore protocol, no matter who they're facing. A woman in the crowd yelled out, "We got your back." Jasmine smiled, not out of relief, but with resolve. "Thank you. But I don't just want your support. I want your attention, your pressure, your voice, because they won't hear me unless they hear us." The conference ended with a single question from a high school senior holding a homemade press badge. "Do you think this will actually change anything?" Jasmine stepped off the platform and walked up to her. "It already has," she said, "because I'm not letting it go, and neither are you." But while the crowd cheered, behind closed doors, pushback was already beginning, and Jasmine was ready for that, too. The backlash came fast, and Jasmine expected it. Within hours of her press conference, the same conservative blogs that once called her too bold for Congress labeled her dramatic, playing victim, and race-baiting. One outlet ran a headline that read, "Crockett cries wolf in South Dallas stunt." Another questioned whether she fabricated the story for political gain, ignoring the multiple camera angles already circulating online. She didn't respond. Instead, she sat with her team and sorted through the growing pile of messages, both supportive and cruel. There were death threats, anonymous calls with heavy breathing and muffled voices. A few voicemails called her a disgrace. One said she should have stayed in D.C. where she belonged. Trigg stayed close. "They're coming for you now," he said, scrolling through screenshots. "You know that, right?" "I've been ready," she replied. The support, though, that was louder. Community leaders from Dallas, Phoenix, Oakland, and Baton Rouge reached out. Old classmates, past clients from her law days, civil rights attorneys, organizers, even a few retired officers quietly messaged her to say they were ashamed of how things went down. But one call shook her in a different way. It came from a woman named Teresa Given, a retired postal worker from Shreveport. "I don't have Twitter," she said, "but my granddaughter showed me the video. I just wanted to tell you I saw what they did, and you didn't scream. You didn't panic. You stayed calm. That's what got to me. That's what made me cry." Jasmine closed her eyes. "Thank you." Teresa didn't ask for anything. She just wanted to say it. By Thursday, her office was fielding interview requests nonstop. She chose only one, a sit-down with a local black journalist named Darnell Beck, who had covered community stories for 2 decades and never sensationalized paying for clicks. They met in a small coffee shop near Fair Park. Darnell turned a recorder on, leaned forward, and asked, "What would you say to the people who think this story will disappear by next week?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Not this one, because I'm not letting it." "And why not?" "Because I'm tired of the cycle, the incident, the outrage, the statement, the silence. I watched too many names fade. I'm not going to be one of them." She paused. "And I don't want to be remembered for being handcuffed. I want to be remembered for what came after." That night, she met with Triggs and her legislative staff. They sat in her apartment, surrounded by papers, laptops, and half-empty containers of takeout. They were building something, not a moment, a movement. "I want federal-level enforcement," Jasmine said, pointing to a draft document. "Not just training modules. I want to tie funding to actual behavior, body cam review audits, public complaints tracked nationally. If a cop gets fired in one county for misconduct, they don't get hired in another one like it never happened." Triggs looked up. "That's going to get you enemies." "Good," Jasmine replied. "Let them show themselves." They worked until 1 a.m. The outline for a new bill, the Community Integrity Act, was on its 5th revision. And while some pushed back, others stepped up. Congressman Theo Branch from Pennsylvania offered to co-sponsor. Senator Lionel Fields from California sent a message of support. Even an independent representative from Iowa, who rarely spoke on race-related issues, privately called and said, "What happened to you should never happen to anyone. I'll stand with you if you go public with this." Things were shifting slowly, unevenly, but shifting. And Jasmine, exhausted but clear-eyed, knew one thing. This wasn't going to end with applause on the steps of City Hall. It would have to end in a voting chamber, on paper and law. But before that, she had one last thing to do. And it wasn't about politics. The school gym smelled like floor wax and popcorn. Folding chairs were arranged in crooked rows, and the buzz of conversation bounced off the high ceilings. It wasn't a press conference. No reporters, no bright lights, just kids, teachers, and a few parents who stayed after pickup to hear her speak. Jasmine stood in front of a hand-painted banner that read, "Future Leaders of Texas Elementary," still in her blue shirt, the same one from that day. She'd chosen to come here, to the same school district she once attended, because if there was anyone she wanted to speak to face, it was the kids who looked like her. No cameras, no rehearsed speech, just a real moment. "I want to tell you all something," she began. "Something that happened to me. Some of you might have heard already, but I need you to hear it from me." The room grew quiet. I was handcuffed by police officers last week, right outside my aunt's house. They said I looked suspicious. I told them who I was, but they didn't care. They saw me, and they didn't see my name or my job or my humanity. They saw a threat. A little girl in the second row raised her hand. "Were you scared?" Jasmine crouched a little so they were eye to eye. "I wasn't scared of them," she said. "I was scared that it might make you think you don't matter, that you could do everything right and still be treated like you're wrong. Silence, the kind that presses on your chest. But listen to me," she said, standing tall again. "You do matter. You always will. And when things like that happen, we don't stop. We don't shrink. We están taller. We get louder, and we write the rules that protect people like us." That was why she was really there, because earlier that morning, Jasmine had introduced the Community Integrity Act to Congress. The bill was clear: federal funding tied to transparency, mandatory body cam audits, a national police misconduct registry, an independent civilian board that reviewed complaints, not internal affairs, real accountability. And she didn't read it in some tired, monotone voice. She read it like it was personal, because it was. Some members of Congress shifted in their chairs. Some stared down at their notes, suddenly interested in anything but her. But others nodded, visibly moved. Later, in a hallway just outside the chamber, a representative from Florida leaned in and said quietly, "You just shook the room." Back in Dallas, the police department issued a formal apology, but came with conditions, carefully worded, legal-sounding, too little, too late. Jasmine didn't respond. She let the bill speak for her. Reed, the older officer, was placed on leave pending investigation. Dunlap resigned quietly, submitting a letter that barely made it to the local paper. But one part stuck out. "I made a mistake. I knew something was wrong, and I didn't stop it. I let fear of my partner override my conscience." It wasn't justice, but it was a start. And as the bill gained support, so did Jasmine's voice. She appeared on panels, met with civil rights lawyers, even sat down with police reform advocates and union leaders, people who didn't always agree with her, but were finally willing to talk. She made it clear this wasn't about revenge. It was about prevention. It was about making sure that the next time a kid walked home in a blue shirt, they didn't get profiled, that the next woman with natural hair and a tote bag wasn't treated like a suspect just because she stood tall. And that message, it landed in town halls, in classrooms, on Sunday sermons, on the lips of women who stood in the mirror and saw Jasmine in their reflection. The gym full of kids clapped when she finished, loud and messy. A little boy came up afterward and handed her a drawing of her standing in front of a house, arms raised like a superhero. "You got powers now," he said. Jasmine smiled. "I always did." But while the bill gained traction, Jasmine knew the fight isn't finished. There was still one more truth she had to face. One more message the world needed to hear. The TV studio was colder than Jasmine expected. Bright lights, a heavy microphone clipped to her blazer, producers whispering behind glass. They gave her the questions in advance, but she barely glanced at them. Tonight wasn't about scripting anything. It was about speaking from the place that still ached every time she drove past that street. Across from her sat journalist Alandre Mays, respected for never sugarcoating anything. "Congresswoman," she began, Some people say the bill is ambitious, that it goes too far, that it's too aggressive toward law enforcement. What do you say to them? Jasmine folded her hands calmly. I say they weren't the ones in cuffs. Alan Ray nodded. She didn't interrupt. I say they didn't have their dignity stripped in front of their neighbors, or their name erased with a label like suspicious. I say we've played polite for too long, and it hasn't protected us. So no, I don't think it goes too far. I think it's just far enough to make people uncomfortable. And maybe that's what change feels like. The audience was quiet, listening. Alan Ray nodded slightly. Do you think what happened to you will happen again? To someone else? Jasmine looked straight into the camera. Yes, and that's why we don't stop. She paused, not for effect, but because she meant every word. I didn't want to become a symbol. I didn't want to be the next trending name tied to injustice. But when it happened, when they cuffed me like I was a stranger in the very place that made me, I knew I had a choice. I could get angry and disappear, or I could get angry and build. Alan Ray asked one last question. What would you tell your younger self if she was watching this right now? Jasmine smiled softly. I tell her she's going to have to carry a lot, more than she deserves. But every time someone tells her she's too loud, too opinionated, too much, that just means she's getting close to the truth. I tell her to keep going, even when it's heavy. Especially when it's heavy. That night, the interview went viral, but not because of outrage. This time was something else. People shared it because it felt real. Because it wasn't just about one woman. It was about a line in the sand, drawn firmly. Finally, the next morning, she visited Aunt Shirley again. This time she stayed longer. They sat on the porch sipping tea, watching the neighborhood move. Kids laughed in the street. A woman 2 houses down hung laundry and waved. The man with the pit bull strolled past again. Same leash, same rhythm. I'm proud of you, Shirley said. Jasmine looked down. I didn't want this to happen. I know, but maybe it had to. They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to. Later that week, she returned to the Capitol. Her bill had gathered 42 co-sponsors. Not enough to guarantee passage, but enough to force debate, enough to put pressure on the ones who like to pretend things like this didn't happen. She printed a photo of herself in cuffs, one of the clearest screenshots from Kian's video, and slipped it into her folder. Not to display it, just to carry it as a reminder, not of pain, but of purpose. Before stepping into the chamber, she sent a message to Kian. Thanks for being brave enough to record. That clip changed the game. You ever want to intern in DC? You got a place. He replied with a wide-eyed emoji and a "you for real" text that made her laugh. The work wasn't over. It never would be. But something had shifted because the system that tried to shrink her had only made her voice louder, her will harder, her reach longer. And the next time someone got profiled, maybe they'd get a different ending. Maybe they'd stand on their own driveway and not be treated like a suspect. Maybe because of one day, one video, one woman who refused to let it slide. Furthermore, Jasmine Crockett's story is a powerful testament to the resilience and determination required to confront injustice. And despite personal humiliation and negative backlash, she transformed her experience into a catalyst for systemic change. Specifically, key lessons emerge from her journey. First, don't stay silent in the face of injustice, as Jasmine didn't let the incident slide, but actively confronted it, spoke out, and took action. Second, the power of community solidarity became evident when support from her family, neighbors, and later a wider community empowered her. In particular, Kian's video is a prime example of how a small act can create a huge impact. Third, transforming pain into action was crucial. Rather than dwelling on being a victim, Jasmine channeled her anger and frustration into building a movement and pushing for legislation to protect others. Moreover, real change requires persistence. The fight didn't end with a press conference or an apology, but demanded continuous effort, legislative perseverance, and alliance building. Finally, the importance of self-awareness and courage cannot be overstated, as Jasmine knew who she was and refused to let others' prejudices define her worth, bravely standing up for her rights and those of people like her. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't scroll past. Speak up. Share it. Support the real ones doing the work. Because silence doesn't protect anyone. But truth can start a revolution.